Chandrika Ponnamperuma, consultant cardiologist at the National Hospital of Sri Lanka, and her final talk will be on management of valvular heart disease in pregnancy, the timing and mode of delivery from cardiac point of view. Over to you, Dr. Ponnamperuma.
So I've been asked to talk today about principles of managing valvular heart disease complicating pregnancy, timing and mode of delivery from a cardiac point of view. Well, there are some important physiological changes which occur during pregnancy. The plasma volume starts to go up by 6 weeks, and it's about 40 to 50% higher than baseline towards the second trimester, and then it plateaus till delivery. The heart rate starts to go up by about 10 to 20% and remains high for 2 to 5 days after delivery. So does the stroke volume. It increases from about 8 weeks, peaks at about 20 weeks during pregnancy, and returns to baseline only after about 2 weeks postpartum. So this is why pregnancy complicates heart disease, because an already compromised heart sometimes finds it difficult to cope up with these physiological changes. The increase in blood volume, there's a heart rate, increase in heart rate and cardiac output. In addition, there's a reduction in systemic vascular resistance with opening up of the placenta. This causes the systolic blood pressure to fall in early gestation, and diastolic blood pressure is about 10 millimeters mercury below baseline in second trimester. A normal heart will increase the cardiac output to compensate for this drop in vascular resistance, but hearts with fixed cardiac output states like mitral stenosis, aortic stenosis, or hearts which has a reduced ventricular function sometimes find it difficult to cope up with this stress. And there's an increased workload of late pregnancy and delivery, which is obvious, and there's increased coagulability of blood. Certain conditions where, for example, patients who are having prosthetic valves, patients who are having atrial fibrillation, and patients who are having mitral stenosis with dilated left atria, and patients who have low ejection fraction, the risk of thromboembolism is high during pregnancy towards the later stages of pregnancy. And certain drugs which we otherwise use to treat these patients are contraindicated due to fetal toxicity. So these hemodynamic changes lead to increased risk of pulmonary edema and heart failure, increased risk of pulmonary hypertensive crisis. As I mentioned earlier, hypotensive crisis can occur in fixed cardiac output states when the heart is unable to increase the cardiac output for the demand, particularly when the placental circulation opens up. There's increased incidence of thromboembolic events, and there's unmasking of poor cardiac reserve, particularly due to the increased workload of pregnancy. So it's important to have a pre-pregnancy assessment, ideally in all patients, at least in mothers who are known to be at risk, with a good history and assessment of a functional status before pregnancy. When there's any doubt in the history and the functional status before pregnancy, and on clinical examination, if you find anything abnormal like a murmur, echocardiography is indicated. And in patients who have borderline cardiac lesions, or in mothers who have borderline cardiac lesions like moderate aortic stenosis, moderate mitral stenosis, and in patients who have significant cardiac lesions like severe mitral stenosis, severe aortic stenosis, but who don't have any symptoms. They are asymptomatic people with a good exercise tolerance, and exercise test is indicated. And with the exercise test, if the patient could achieve an expected workload of 70% or more, usually they are considered as fit for pregnancy. If there's a drop in blood pressure with exercise, or if there's a drop in saturation, oxygen saturation with exercise, or if they can't tolerate a workload of 70% of expected, they are not fit for pregnancy. Their cardiac status should be reviewed again, and whatever correctable should be corrected before going for pregnancy. So there are certain conditions which are high risk states which are considered contraindications for pregnancy. Pulmonary arterial hypertension of any cause, severe systemic ventricular dysfunction, less than 30% ejection fraction and NYHA class 3 to 4, previous peripartum cardiomyopathy with any residual impairment of left ventricular function, severe mitral stenosis or severe symptomatic aortic stenosis, Marfan syndrome with aorta dilated more than 45 millimeters and aortic dilatation more than 50 millimeters in association with bicuspid aortic valves are considered contraindicated, and also native severe coarctation. If the patient has these conditions, they should undergo correctable surgery or correctable procedures before going in for pregnancy. So if you look at heart disease, overall so far I've been talking about general principles about not only valvular heart disease, general principles governing pregnancy and heart disease. So if you take all heart diseases which we encounter in pregnancy, about 70 to 80% in developed world is due to congenital heart diseases. About 50 to 90% in developing countries it's due to valvular heart diseases. In Sri Lanka also we see more valvular heart disease than congenital heart disease going into pregnancy. Coronary artery disease is rare, but it's increasing in frequency with increasing non-communicable diseases in the country, and cardiomyopathies are rare but severe. So my talk today is mainly about valvular heart disease, so we'll restrict to valvular heart disease from now on. So mitral stenosis is the commonest valvular heart disease we see due to rheumatic carditis, right? So pregnant mothers can go into heart failure even with moderate mitral stenosis. About 1/3 of patients who have a mitral valve area of 1.5 square centimeters, that is moderate mitral stenosis, can go into heart failure. In severe mitral stenosis, about 50% of patients can go into heart failure, that is a mitral valve area less than 1 square centimeter. Mortality varies from, maternal mortality varies from about 0 to 3%, prematurity rate of about 20 to 30%, and a UGR rate of about 5 to 20%, and a fetal death rate of about 1 to 5% is associated with mitral stenosis. The risk of a mother with mitral stenosis going into heart failure is higher when she is in an NYHA class of 2 or more, when there's atrial fibrillation, when the pulmonary artery pressure is more than 30 millimeters mercury, and the older the maternal age, the risk of going into heart failure during pregnancy is more. That is due to the associated diastolic dysfunction of the left ventricle, which occurs with age, compromising LV filling. So when you manage these patients, you have to manage them monitor them fairly frequently. There should be at least monthly or bi-monthly follow-up. If the pulmonary artery pressures are high, in particular, if pulmonary artery pressure is more than 50 millimeters mercury, you should advocate rest and should start a long-acting beta-1 selective beta blocker. What we commonly use is long-acting metoprolol to control the heart rate for up to about 50 to 60 beats per minute. As you know, when you reduce the heart rate, the diastole prolongs, and that gives more time for the left ventricle to fill through this stenosed mitral valve. Therefore, the cardiac output increases. Therefore, the ideal heart rate you should try to maintain is about 50 to 60 beats per minute. Digoxin can be used if beta blockers are contraindicated, for example, in asthmatics. And diuretics should be added if symptoms persist. Diuretics is not the first choice in these patients because it can cause dehydration and reduced filling of the left ventricle. Beta blockers is the first drug of first choice. If symptoms continue in spite of diuretics, only you add beta blockers. As I told you earlier, that higher risk of anticoagulation, higher risk of thromboembolic phenomena. So therefore, there should be a low threshold to anticoagulate, particularly if they are in atrial fibrillation, if there's spontaneous echo contrast seen in echo. This spontaneous echo contrast you see like smoke. Those are microthrombi in the circulation. If there's a low cardiac output, or if there's a large left atrium, you should anticoagulate these patients. If the valve is structurally suitable for PTMC, and if there's severe PTMC, the patient should undergo severe mitral stenosis. The patient should undergo percutaneous transseptal mitral commissurotomy after the 20th week. Why we select after the 20th week is then the organogenesis, the radiation injury to the fetus is minimal during that period due to radiation, and also the fetus is still quite low in the abdomen. It has not come to the upper abdomen. Therefore, the procedure is easier. Patient can lie flat for a longer time during that period, and the complications like the reduced venous return while lying flat are less. So therefore, we try to do these procedures around 20th to 24th, that period of gestation. If the valve is not suitable for PTMC and the patient has severe mitral stenosis, and if the mother's life is threatened due to this condition, then we recommend open valvotomy or mitral valve replacement. This is only for mothers who go into pulmonary edema or heart failure with mitral stenosis. Otherwise, we try to manage them medically. Regarding delivery of these patients, vaginal delivery is preferred if they are in NYHA class 1 or 2. Lower segment cesarean section if they are in class 3 or 4 heart failure, and if the valve is not suitable for PTMC, or if PTMC has failed. Only those patients go for cesarean section. There are some issues with vaginal delivery which need to be dealt with. You have to, during vaginal delivery, the patient gets pain and gets tachycardia. This should be minimized. Therefore, epidural anesthesia is recommended to eliminate the pain as much as possible so that the tachycardia will not occur. Work of labor should be minimized. Therefore, we recommend assisting the second stage of labor. And there is when the placenta empties into the circulation, there is a volume overload which occurs in the second stage of labor. To reduce the effects of that, we recommend giving a bolus of IV furosemide 40 milligrams in the second stage of labor. So we recommend delivering under epidural anesthesia with assisted second stage, and also recommend to give furosemide IV 40 milligrams during the second stage of labor. Lower segment cesarean section in mothers with mitral stenosis, when done, it's rarely done. We need to avoid excessive vasodilatation during anesthesia. Therefore, what is generally used is a combined spinal and epidural anesthesia. Spinal alone is not used due to this problem of vasodilatation. And also we recommend meticulous fluid balance. We have to avoid fluid overload. Then we coming to aortic stenosis. Again, like mitral stenosis, aortic stenosis also is a fixed cardiac output state, therefore should be managed carefully during pregnancy. It could be bicuspid or rheumatic. In our part of the world, rheumatic is commoner, and the outcome depends on three things. One is the severity of aortic stenosis. Second thing is symptoms the patient has at baseline before getting pregnant, and the LV function. Asymptomatic patients with moderate and severe aortic stenosis with a normal LV function, that is LV function more than 50%, ejection fraction more than 50%, we recommend a pre-pregnancy exercise stress test. That's a treadmill test, exercise treadmill test. If the patient does the treadmill test well achieving 70% of workload with a normal blood pressure and heart rate response. The patient can be predicted to tolerate the pregnancy well, and pregnancy is recommended. That is in moderate and severe aortic stenosis with normal LV function who are asymptomatic. Severe aortic stenosis with symptoms or reduced LV function, they need to undergo aortic valve replacement surgery before pregnancy. So if the patient has severe aortic stenosis with symptoms or with reduced LV function, pregnancy should not be recommended before aortic valve replacement. They should undergo aortic valve replacement first and then go for pregnancy. If these patients are asymptomatic, then you recommend a treadmill test to see how well, to predict how well they will tolerate pregnancy. So these patients also need monthly or bi-monthly cardiographic follow-up. They need rest and medical therapy for heart failure. Again, beta blockers, long-acting beta blockers, beta-1 selective beta blockers are recommended. If they have severe symptomatic aortic stenosis which is not responding to medical therapy, balloon valvuloplasty is recommended if the valve is non-calcific. That is mainly you see in patients with bicuspid valves. Here in our patients who have rheumatic valves, most of them have very calcific valves, which makes the balloon aortic valvuloplasty very risky. So if the patients have severe symptomatic aortic stenosis with a valve not suitable for valvuloplasty, balloon aortic valvuloplasty, we recommend early cesarean segment section, LSCS, in preparation for aortic valve replacement. Early because as soon as the fetus is viable, we recommend to take the fetus out. Usually we recommended doing it in a cardiothoracic theatre, so that if the patient goes into cardiogenic shock during surgery, they can go on pump. The pump is this heart lung pump. So and do the valve surgery at the same sitting, so that the mother's life will be saved. If this aortic stenosis is not severe, we recommend vaginal delivery. So the difficult customers are the stenosis of mitral and aortic valves. So in regurgitation, in mitral and aortic regurgitation, decreased systemic resistance reduces regurgitant volume. LV dysfunction, decreased systemic resistance reduces the regurgitant volume. Therefore, it helps the heart. So they feel better. LV dysfunction and acute severe regurgitation are poorly tolerated even though. So if the patient didn't have much aortic regurgitation and mitral regurgitation, if they develop severe regurgitation during pregnancy, they tolerate that poor due to the increased volume overload and all that. So the fluid overload should be medically managed, and therapy refractory heart failure should undergo valve surgery, aortic or mitral. Symptomatic patients, if they are class 2 or less, can undergo vaginal delivery with epidural anesthesia and shortened second stage as earlier. Pulmonary stenosis is usually well tolerated. Severe symptomatic pulmonary stenosis will need balloon valvuloplasty. Otherwise, even severe pulmonary stenosis, if not symptomatic, doesn't need valvuloplasty. So the next important subtopic on valvular heart disease is mechanical valve prosthesis and anticoagulation. This has to be understood properly because this is a preventable common cause of maternal death in Sri Lanka. So warfarin is the best for valves. With warfarin alone given in all 3 trimesters, there's a thrombosis rate is 3.9% and a mortality of about 2%. If unfractionated heparin is given in all 3 trimesters, in second and third trimester, unfractionated heparin in the first trimester and warfarin in second and third trimester, the thrombosis rate will go up to 9 to 9.2% and the mortality rate will double to 4%. If unfractionated heparin is given in all three trimesters, the thrombosis rate will go up to 33% and the mortality rate will go up to 15%. If low molecular weight heparin is used in all three trimesters, the thrombosis rate will go up to 9%. So the best for the valve is warfarin. Let's see what is best for the fetus. With a warfarin dose of less than 5 milligrams, there is a risk of embryopathy of 2.6%. When the warfarin dose is more than 5 milligrams, the risk of embryopathy goes up to about 8%. This is because warfarin crosses the placenta, but the heparins, low molecular weight and unfractionated, does not cross the placenta. Therefore, for the valve, warfarin is good. For the fetus, heparin is good. To strike a balance, what is recommended is if oral anticoagulation should be continued until pregnancy is achieved. There is no doubt about that. If the warfarin dose is less than 5 milligrams, we recommend continuing it throughout pregnancy because it has the lowest risk on the valve, and for the embryopathy the risk is only about 2.6%. We recommend switching to low molecular weight heparin or unfractionated heparin from 6 to 12 weeks of pregnancy if warfarin dose is more than 5 milligrams. Effect of more than 5 milligrams. Then all anticoagulants during pregnancy are very unpredictable, therefore should be able to monitor. We should not use enoxaparin unless we can monitor factor 10A levels. That is a big mistake people do. They put on enoxaparin and end up getting valve thrombosis without monitoring. So during delivery, again as I said earlier, warfarin crosses the placenta and can cause a coagulopathy in the fetus. Therefore, if the patient is already on warfarin, patient should not undergo vaginal delivery because the fetus is going to get a ICH due to that. Therefore, for planned vaginal delivery, warfarin should be stopped at 36 weeks, started on heparin or enoxaparin if monitoring is possible, otherwise unfractionated heparin, and go for a planned vaginal delivery. If warfarin is continued due to high risk of thrombosis, patient should not undergo vaginal delivery, should undergo cesarean section. If patient has to undergo emergency section, if patient goes into labor, unplanned labor while on warfarin, it is recommended to do emergency section without letting the labor proceed. In summary, pregnancy in the high-risk population should be considered a failure in the primary healthcare system. Women with valvular heart disease may tolerate pregnancy well. Therefore, it's not contraindicated for everybody. Follow-up and mode of delivery need to be individualized. They should be properly assessed before pregnancy and appropriate recommendations should be made. Percutaneous interventions are indicated mainly for symptomatic severe mitral stenosis and severe aortic stenosis. Indications for surgical interventions during pregnancy are rare. Anticoagulation with warfarin throughout the pregnancy is safe when the dose is less than 5 milligrams. Low molecular weight heparin or unfractionated heparin can be used instead of warfarin in the first trimester if warfarin dose is more than 5 milligrams. Low molecular weight heparin should not be used if factor 10A levels cannot be monitored. Should appreciate the hemodynamic changes of pregnancy and labor when managing valvular heart disease in pregnancy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Purna, for the presentation. We have some questions. If the pregnant patient with heart failure has postpartum hemorrhage and goes into shock, how is the management different from those than those without heart failure? What can you tell us about it?
Can you repeat the question?
If a pregnant patient with heart failure has postpartum hemorrhage and goes into cardiac shock, how is the management different from those who don't have heart failure?
Well, it needs very meticulous hemodynamic monitoring during this period. That is the key, because presence of heart failure, you should the volume status should be managed as accurately as possible. Therefore, you need intra-arterial blood pressure monitoring as well as CVP monitoring is essential, and fluid resuscitation should be done to maintain a CVP around 10-12 CVP should try to manage, and should try to keep the hemoglobin around at least around 8. The minimum should not allow hemoglobin to drop around 8. Then the rest of the management will depend on what actual cardiac condition the patient has.
There's also another question. Is there are there any contraindications for breastfeeding in peripartum cardiomyopathy?
Yes, there is a contraindication for breastfeeding in peripartum cardiomyopathy. Peripartum cardiomyopathy is a condition with a significant mortality. Therefore, you should treat it with optimum medications for heart failure. So one reason why breastfeeding becomes contraindicated because of the drugs, because we have to give ACE inhibitors, we have to give spironolactone, drugs which are generally contraindicated in breastfeeding. Then the other thing is to reduce the maternal workload. The third thing is prolactin is considered as one of the pathways which is causing heart. That's not proven, but there are studies which have shown bromocriptine helps in peripartum cardiomyopathy. Therefore, one other reason, a speculated reason, is to reduce the prolactin secretion during this period.
Thank you, Dr. Pennam Perumal, for that presentation.